Hey guys, Charlene Ortiz here. Today we're finally going to do the video on exercise and how it can help you to overcome addiction and maintain sobriety. And this is a video that I knew when I started my channel I wanted to do this very early on. It does have a significant personal value to me because I unfortunately lost my father 4 years ago as a result of alcohol addiction and prescription drug medication. When my father died, I would say I mourned more his life than I did his death. And the reason is because my father had the potential to really live an amazing life and make a really significant contribution to society. And when I was young, I remember my father as being a very intelligent, charismatic, talented, handsome, strong, robust man. And when I was 12 years old, he unfortunately abandoned me, my mom, and my sister, and my mom had to take care of us by herself. And then at the age of 25, he reemerged. When I was 25, he reemerged and he came back to Ohio. At the time I was living in San Jose, and I flew out to see him again for the first time in 12 years. Well, when I saw him, he was unrecognizable, and I could not believe how emaciated he was. I couldn't believe how much he had aged. He looked like he had aged 30 years in the 12 years that he had been gone. And he had just become this frail, weak shadow of a man that he used to be. And it was very heartbreaking to see the intense amount of damage his addiction had done to his body. Because he was homeless for several years, he contracted tuberculosis, and then he developed pancreatitis because of his extreme drinking habits, as well as diabetes. And for the 10 plus years of his life, between the time I saw him again and the time he died, his existence was just full of pain and agony, as well as his mental cognition coherence was really depleted as well. And he was just a very unhappy man. And it was really sad because I knew that my father had the potential to live the full, productive, and purposeful life that he deserved to live and that he should have lived. And so for those of you that are battling addiction right now, or you have a loved one who is battling an addiction, this is going to be a really great video for you to learn how addiction affects the brain and the body, all the way down to the neurological level, and how exercise can be a very powerful ally to help you to overcome addiction and maintain sobriety for the rest of your life. And so I think you guys are going to learn a lot, and you're really going to appreciate what addiction is and how powerful exercise is by the time you're done watching this video. And it's a little long, and I ask that you bear with me. But if you stick in there and you really pay attention, I think you'll really appreciate it, and I think you'll really enjoy it. So, all right, I am excited to get started, so let's begin. The first thing we're going to discuss is the structure of a neuron. And the neuron is basically just the name of the cells that are located in your nervous system. So I'm going to do a little drawing for you here. So first I'm going to start with the nucleus, which is in the middle of the neuron. And the main part of the neuron right here is what's called the cell body. And then there are structures that extend from the cell body, and these structures are called dendrites. And they kind of extend out like little tree branches. Just like that. And I'll draw one more dendrite. Okay, and so what extends from this section right here is going to be an axon. Now, there's several different types of structures of nerves, but today we're going to focus on this type of structure. There's like 3 or 4 different ways that the nerves are structured. So this nerve in particular is covered with what's called a myelin sheath. Okay. And this then is going to end into what's called axon terminals. And these little bulbs on the end are the axon terminals. Okay? And so this is the axon that's coming in the middle here, ending at the axon terminals. So this is the nucleus, the dendrites. This whole thing right here, the whole structure, is the cell body, or the soma. People will call it the soma too. And then this is the axon that's extending. This is the myelin sheath. Okay. There's definitely other structures, but I'm just doing a general diagram because trust me, this goes way, way more in depth. If we were to really get into the nervous system, this would be like probably an 8-hour video. So, like I said, I just want to do the general structures that are involved in relation to what we're going to be discussing, which is exercise and addiction. So, okay, so here we have the axon that extends from the nerve, the cell body, and it's covered by what's called a myelin sheath. And the myelin sheath, there's little nodes right here. They're called nodes of Renier, and I might be pronouncing that wrong. It's been a long time. But, and so what happens when an action potential comes down the nerve, it jumps from one node to the next, okay? Making it incredibly efficient. I'm gonna talk about what an action potential here is in a second. Making the signal very efficient. And so the analogy I like to use, I'm a big superhero fan, and the Hulk is my favorite superhero. And the Hulk can jump huge distances from one place to another. If you were to walk that distance, it would take you a lot longer to walk the distance that he can jump. And so that's what's happening with the signals, is that they jump from one node to another. With a condition like MS, multiple sclerosis, the myelin sheath starts to deteriorate. And so that's why people will lose motor function, and eventually will lead to paralysis and even death. But I can do a video specifically on MS one of these days too, if you guys would like me to do a video on that. So an action potential is basically is initiated by what's called a sodium-potassium pump. And I'm not going to get into too much detail about that today, but the action potential is what initiates what is going to occur in what's called a synapse, which I'm going to I'm going to blow that up here in a second. And so the action potential is what's going to initiate it. And we have certain neurotransmitters that are going to be activated by the action potential that will respond to that. So for example, the neurotransmitter dopamine is responsible for the reward system in our brain. And so whenever we eat, whenever we have sexual orgasm, whenever we drink, it will release a feeling of satisfaction and reward to encourage us to do it again. It's also responsible for motivation, appetite, and there's a lot of different actions that dopamine is responsible for. But so when you eat something, that releases an action potential that will stimulate dopamine, that will produce an effect of satisfaction and reward. So the brain can kind of reinforce that that is a good action, that eating is a good thing because it is essential for our survival. So things that we do that are important for the survival of our species, that dopamine is involved in giving us that feeling of reward, happiness, motivation, so that we continue to do that, to continue to assure our survival as a species. So So the action potential will go down the axon and then it will end at the axon terminal. So that's this little bulb right here, okay? And then from there, it goes on to the next nerve. And so the way that the nerves communicate with each other is that an axon right here is actually connected to a dendrite up here. And so another nerve's axon terminals could be distributed just like that, and then this is another nerve and it has its axon, or these are the axon terminals, these are the dendrites of this nerve, and then this nerve will have its dendrites that'll have its axons that are connected to it. And so where a synapse occurs is where the axon and the dendrite meet, okay? And I'm gonna blow that up for you here in a second. So this is where the axon and the dendrite are, okay? And so what this looks like, blown up, is this, okay? Where that area of connection is, all right? And they don't actually touch, like they never really connect. There's actually a space in between there. And this space is called the synaptic cleft right here. Okay, that's that space right there. All right, so the action potential is coming down the axon to all the way to the axon terminal. And this is called the presynaptic nerve, and this is the postsynaptic nerve. And the synapse occurs in this area right here. So what is a synapse? So a synapse is the communication between a neurotransmitter and its receptor, at least in this case right here, because there are two different types of a communication in the nervous system, which is an electrical signal and a chemical signal, but we're focusing on the chemical signal in this area right here. So right here we have, inside here we have our neurotransmitters. So this could be dopamine, it could be epinephrine, norepinephrine, it could be acetylcholine, and I'm going to discuss the certain neurotransmitters and what their functions are here in a second once I explain the synapse and what it does. All right, so down on the other postsynaptic nerve is going to be what's called receptors, okay? And so what's going to happen when the action potential hits the axon terminal? It's going to open up a channel, it's called a calcium-gated channel, where calcium is going to initiate the vesicle to come to the edge of the axon terminal. And so this vesicle will then come to the edge and it will open up, allowing the neurotransmitters to now come out into the synaptic cleft, okay? So let's say this is dopamine that's coming out right there. And the dopamine will then bind to its receptor, and the receptor, so the dopamine will come and it will bind to the receptors, okay? And then the receptors will take the dopamine and continue to the next nerve, to the next nerve, to the next nerve. So this process just keeps happening again, and again, until the message gets to the brain or until the body does the appropriate action that is associated with that neurotransmitter. Like another example would be norepinephrine or epinephrine. So norepinephrine and epinephrine are responsible for the fight or flight response. So for example, if you're walking home one night and it's late and you see somebody coming towards you that could be a possible attacker, you see them with a weapon or what have you, your heart rate starts to increase, your breathing starts to increase, your circulation starts to increase, and during that time you determine, can I take this person or should I run? And in order for you to either fight or flight, your body is going to increase those processes of breathing and pumping blood throughout the body, so that way oxygen levels are increased to your muscles giving you more power, more energy, and the ability to get away faster. And that's what an adrenaline rush is. And you might have heard of stories where people in very traumatic or fatal situations that could be fatal, where a car falls on their child, they're able to pick it up, and then they come back later and they can't budge it. Well, that's just because there was so much adrenaline that was pumping through their body. Like, it literally gave them like superhuman strength to give them the ability to pick up that car, because again, it was a situation where somebody's life was in danger. And again, these are all these neurotransmitters exist for our survival as a species. And so again, so this could be dopamine, epinephrine, what have you. So whatever stimulus is in your environment, whatever it is that that is affecting you at that moment, is what neurotransmitter is going to be released to respond to what's happening to you at that moment in your life. Okay, so again, we have the structure of the nerve here, and then we have the axon terminal, where the axon terminal and the dendrite meet is blown up right here. And this is what occurs when we have a synapse. And believe it or not, again, there's even more that's happening here. And I am making this quite general, because there's even more that's going on, but again, I don't want to bore you too much. I don't want this to go on too long. All right, so let's go ahead. We're going to go on to the different neurotransmitters and what their functions are. Now we're going to focus on certain neurotransmitters and what their functions are. There are definitely more neurotransmitters in the body, but we're just going to focus on these particular ones today. Starting with dopamine, as I mentioned earlier, dopamine is responsible for the feeling of reward and satisfaction that we get when we eat, when we drink, when we have sex to orgasm. It's also responsible for motivation, memory, and also movement. Okay, and so that's just the neurotransmitter that just makes us feel good, makes us feel great after a good meal when we feel full. It's the neurotransmitter that makes us feel amazing when we have an orgasm. It's also the neurotransmitter that motivates us to do things that provide some type of reward, whether it's getting your paycheck and depositing the money, like whatever has to do with our ability to survive, whatever actions we do that support that reinforce that, dopamine is going to be released, again, in order to make us feel satisfied. All right, serotonin is known as a mood stabilizer. It's also responsible for our sleep cycle, our appetite, digestion. So serotonin is actually mostly found in the digestive system. And so it's also found in the blood platelets too. But it's what's responsible when you have kind of like that gut feeling. That serotonin is actually responsible for that, because again, it's mostly found in your digestive system, but it's also in the blood platelets and the brain. All right, acetylcholine is responsible for memory and learning. And as one thing you guys notice is that a lot of these kind of overlap what different neurotransmitters do. They kind of do overlap a little bit, but it's also involved in muscle movement and contraction. Okay. All right, norepinephrine is responsible for increased alertness, also known as noradrenaline, because it is released from the adrenal glands above the kidneys, and increased heart rate and increased muscle function. Again, so because if you're in a situation where you're in danger, it will initiate the fight or flight response and increase your heart rate, your breathing, give you the ability to run away or fight more efficiently, because you now have more oxygen and blood, being distributed to your muscles. Endorphins and enkephalines are the body's natural opiate, or the body's natural pain reliever. Okay. spell. Okay, so endorphins are responsible for natural pain relief, and it actually is an opiate. Okay? And so whenever you exercise or you injure yourself, experience any type of pain, the body will release endorphins to help you to deal with that pain. And again, it is a survival, it is a survival mechanism. So like if you get hurt or if you're out and you're trying to escape an animal or what have you, endorphins and enkephalines will provide natural pain relief so that you can continue doing what you need to do to survive. Like for example, you've heard of the runner's high, and that's what a runner's high is because when we exercise, we do induce pain, at least if you're doing it right. A good kind of pain, not pain on your joints or anything like that. But I'll talk about that another day. But it does induce pain in our body. That's why it's so hard for us to want to exercise. But so the body will release endorphins in order for us to be able to endure that pain and to control that pain. And so when somebody's been running for a certain amount of time and a certain amount of endorphins has been released into the body, they kind of get this feeling of just energy and euphoria. They don't really feel the pain anymore, and they can just keep going on forever. And so those are endorphins. GABA stands for gamma aminobutyric acid. And GABA is responsible for what's called an IPSP, and that stands for inhibitory postsynaptic potential. And what that means is that an inhibitory postsynaptic potential means that it is less likely an action potential will occur. So what that means is that it will decrease the heart rate, breathing, and kind of relax the body. Okay, so for example, like a lot of benzos, tranquilizers, barbiturates, they act as a GABA receptor, and that's why you feel that feeling of relaxation and just a sleepiness, calmness when you take those drugs, because that's what GABA receptors, that's what they initiate, is an inhibitory postsynaptic potential where it just calms everything down. A drug that I used to take called gabapentin, which I stopped taking it because it literally made me feel drunk. I hated it. And but some people take it for fibromyalgia. It didn't work for me. But it is also prescribed for people that have epilepsy, because epilepsy, when your GABA levels are too low, that's what causes epileptic attacks. It also causes panic attacks, extreme anxiety. And so GABA is responsible from keeping our cells from being too excitatory, just keeping everything just, even keel. Glutamate is the opposite, and this increases the chance of a EPSP and producing an action potential. Okay, so an EPSP stands for excitatory postsynaptic potential, and that's the opposite of an IPSP, where it will create an action potential, which will increase your heart rate, increase your muscle movements, your motor function. It's also important with learning, memory, and cognition. All right, sorry guys, my writing's not too great. And believe it or not, I do have some learning disabilities, when it comes to words and stuff, so it's kind of weird. But so with glutamate is actually the neurotransmitter that came under fire, years ago with MSG, because MSG is a form of glutamate, and when you have too much glutamate in your body, it makes your cells too excitatory, and it can actually cause diseases like Huntington's disease, which is a really, really devastating disease. And that's why, it's important that we keep our glutamate levels, stable as well. And so the GABA and the glutamate basically work to just keep everything on a nice, balanced, even keel level. And so, and with GABA, like for example, when you drink coffee, the reason why you kind of feel some energy, maybe even some anxiety, is because it kind of oppresses the effects of the GABA neurotransmitter. So, all right, so now these are the some of the specific neurotransmitters I'm going to be talking about today. And now we're going to talk about the effects that drugs have on these neurotransmitters. First drugs we're going to discuss are going to be methamphetamines and cocaine. And those drugs have an effect on dopamine levels, norepinephrine, as well as serotonin. So I'm going to redraw the structure of a synapse real quick, so you guys have an idea now what this is about. You've already seen it. So remember, this is the axon terminal, this is the dendrite, presynaptic neuron, postsynaptic neuron, and inside we have our vesicles, and inside the vesicles we have our neurotransmitters. Okay. I like to use a lot of colors because it's more fun. And to me, talking about this kind of stuff is actually fun. I'm one of those weird people. All right, so these are the receptors. All right, so what naturally occurs at a synapse whenever a vesicle opens and the neurotransmitters go into the synaptic cleft is that when they bond to the receptors, okay, there is another structure called a transporter. So, you know, say this is dopamine, and there is a transporter for each of these neurotransmitters. And so what the transporter does is it will take that dopamine, reuptake it, and actually it will transport it back to the vesicle, which will reuptake it, break it down, and then release it again when a stimulus calls for the release of that neurotransmitter. And that happens so that way the body can always maintain a level and balanced amount of a specific neurotransmitter in the blood. And again, to maintain a state of homeostasis. And so what methamphetamine and cocaine do is they block the action of the dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin transporter. So therefore, the neurotransmitter is not reuptaken and broken down. The neurotransmitter stays in the synaptic cleft. And so now there's a lot more neurotransmitter in the synaptic cleft than what they're supposed to be. And that is what gives people that feeling of euphoria, happiness, motivation, energy, like you can take on the world like you're a superhero. And that increase, that drastic increase of these neurotransmitters is what gives people that powerful feeling. And so because this is not normal, the body knows this is not normal. And so the body is always trying to maintain what's called a state of homeostasis. Homeo meaning same, stasis meaning balance. So it's always trying to maintain the same state of balance. So for example, when you get a cold, your body responds by producing mucus, and the mucus is white because those are white blood cells, which is what is involved with immunity. And that way it can help to get your body back to a state of homeostasis by producing the white blood cells to fight off whatever virus or infection you have contracted. So anyway, there's so many different responses that the body naturally does when we're out of balance to maintain homeostasis. So because there's so much dopamine or serotonin, whatever neurotransmitter, in the synaptic cleft, the several of the receptors will pull back. And it will do that so that way, again, the number of neurotransmitters that bind to the receptors, it'll lower it, because there won't be as many receptors now to bind to. And so the way the body sees it, because there's so much of that neurotransmitter in the synaptic cleft, if we don't have that many receptors to bind to, then that'll help to keep everything balanced and even keel. And so then when the drug wears off, and now we're back to a normal level of the neurotransmitter, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, okay? There are no longer the same amount of receptors there to bind to that neurotransmitter, thus creating withdrawal. And so that's why, like, when people do methamphetamines or cocaine, like the norepinephrine is what contributes to alertness and your body's and your ability to focus. And that's why people that are on meth will often do crazy things like clean their whole house with a toothbrush or clean their car for 2 hours. And they just have this incredible surge of energy and motivation. And it's not uncommon for them to stay up for days and weeks at a time, because again, they just have all this energy, and you literally feel like you're a superhero, like you can take on anything. And so once the drug wears off and your body goes back to that normal level of that neurotransmitter, the receptors aren't there to bind to that neurotransmitter, again, to give you that normal feeling that the neurotransmitter is supposed to give you in a normal state when there are no drugs in the system. So you go from normal neurotransmitter to really high normal transmitter to really low neurotransmitter. And that is what causes the horrible symptoms of withdrawal, which can be incredibly intense and incredibly violent. They can range from anxiety, depression, muscle ache, muscle spasms, fatigue, insomnia, vomiting, diarrhea. I mean, going through withdrawal is an incredibly horrible experience. If there is a hell that exists, I would imagine that it would be going through withdrawal for eternity. And so for those of you that have a loved one that suffers from drug addiction, and it's hard for you to understand why they do really bizarre, crazy things in order to get their fix or to get their drug, that's why. Because the body is screaming for that drug now, because everything is now completely imbalanced. And not only that, but there is a structure in the cell called the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. And every cell has little structures inside called organelles, and every organelle has a job. That's how amazing your body is, by the way. But the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, one of its jobs is to detoxify the cell from any foreign and damaging substance. And so it will try to get rid of the drug as fast as possible. The more drugs you take, the harder the smooth endoplasmic reticulum works, making it better at getting rid of the drug, developing your tolerance, so now you need more drug. And there's actually other actions involved in developing tolerance, but that's one of them. And so that's why you'll often hear addicts say, I no longer take the drug to get high, I just take it to feel normal. And so, again, and it also affects their cognitive abilities, their ability to make rational decisions, which is why, again, they might do extreme things like sell their body, steal, steal from you or rob a store, just because, again, the fear of withdrawal and the fear of experiencing those intense symptoms and that pain is so extreme that they will do anything to get that drug so they don't have to go through it. So it isn't necessarily just because they want to get high anymore. And that is another reason why an addict cannot just stop. Because I've heard people say that before. Why can't you just stop to a heroin addict? Well, this is why. Because now over time, the receptors will reemerge if the levels of the neurotransmitters stay in balance. But in the meantime, the withdrawal symptoms are so severe, the addict cannot wait for that to happen. So they need to re-administer the drug again. And that's what causes the vicious cycle. And if you don't do anything about it, then you have a horrible future ahead of you, which will most likely result in death. And so again, for those of you that don't understand why people can't just stop, they can't. They really can't just stop. It is something that takes treatment, detoxification, it takes time. And so never say that to a drug addict, because it'll make them even more angry. And now you understand the science behind why they can't just stop. So it's a lot more complex than that. All right, so again, methamphetamines and cocaine affect dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin levels. Blocks the transporter that reuptakes and breaks it down, so there's more in it. So therefore, the receptors pull back, and now there's not enough receptors for that neurotransmitter to respond to, thus creating the feeling of withdrawal and the need for more drugs. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to move on to heroin, opiates, and alcohol. Okay, so now we're going to discuss opiates and the impact that opiates have on their neurotransmitters and how the body responds to that. So opiates include heroin, hydrocodone, oxycodone, morphine, codeine, and as well as Percocet and a few others, or several others. And so opiates directly affect endorphins. Well, actually, they don't really affect endorphins. They affect more the endorphin receptors. So what opiates do is they're a little more tricky than methamphetamine and cocaine, where methamphetamine just blocks the transporters that reuptakes the neurotransmitters, so the neurotransmitters stay in the synaptic cleft longer, giving you that incredible sensation. So they block that reuptake, where opiates actually trick the body into convincing the body that they are also endorphins. And so they're like an imposter, but because they look so similar, the body will accept it and the receptors will accept it as well. And so what happens when you take a pill or you shoot up heroin, or however way you administer your drug, is the amount of endorphins, and as you guys remember, the vesicles open up and they come out into the synaptic cleft, the neurotransmitters, and they bind to the receptors. And every neurotransmitter has a receptor that is specifically for that neurotransmitter. It's kind of like a soulmate. Like everybody has somebody in the world that they are meant to be with, and they just fit in, just everything between the two of them just seems to be right. And so with the neurotransmitter and a receptor, it's kind of like a lock and key. Or again, like soulmates if you want to be romantic. So, all right, so that's basically what happens, is that the opiates act as endorphins. They trick the body so the body thinks that it's also the natural endorphins that occur in our body, flooding the body with endorphins. Are actually, it actually becomes morphine when it enters the body, and so then again it floods the body, and because the synaptic cleft or the blood is flooded with these neurotransmitters, again the body knows that something is not right. So the receptors will once again back off in order to regulate the amount of endorphins that are inside the body, because they know that this is not right. And it also has an impact on dopamine levels too. And so, but we're highlighting specifically the endorphins, because again, every drug, every addiction stimulates dopamine, every single one. But different addictions and drugs stimulate different neurotransmitters in different ways. But dopamine is pretty much always involved. And so now that the receptors have backed off, and just like with any other drug, including food, if food is the same way, people that have food addiction, it truly is an addiction, because when you eat, it releases dopamine. And especially when you eat foods that are high in fat, high in sugar, because the body likes foods that are calorie dense, because it will last, it will give you more energy. But and again, that's everything is based on survival. Everything the body does is based on survival. And the unfortunate thing is that a lot of the processes that the body does for survival is not as necessary as it used to be, like thousands of years ago when we were living in the wild and we had to run away from animals and we needed a release of endorphins so that we could run away from that animal or whatever dangers we'd face that we just don't face now. But the body still thinks very primarily. It doesn't understand that we live in an, at least here in this country, and in most countries, we don't live in environments where we have to run away from animals or hunt for our food or whatever. But the body is going to still process things the same way. And so as we've developed, as our species and humanity has developed over the years, we have found ways to increase the natural action of those neurotransmitters so that we can get a more intense effect from those neurotransmitters. So, so again, the receptors will back off, then the drug wears off, and now you have the normal amount of endorphins in the blood, but not as many receptors to bind to it, so therefore you don't get the same effect. And the body therefore will crave more. It needs more of that. And again, just like any other drug, eventually the body will re-regulate itself, you know, because the receptors have down-regulated. They've kind of, I guess, degraded it. They've degraded themselves. And where normally, where normally they'll, they'll, I guess, like they'll recycle themselves, or they're kind of bring themselves back. But in a case where there's way too much of a certain neurotransmitter, it will degrade itself. And it takes longer for that neurotransmitter to kind of re-emerge when it's degraded than when it's just simply recycled. And so now again, so we have the normal amount of endorphins and the less receptors to bind, and we go through withdrawal. And over time, if those levels of endorphins stay the same, then the receptors will come back, because so the body will communicate, say, hey guys, everything's clear, everything's good, you can come back now, and say, okay, well, let's everybody go back to work and what we were normally doing. But in the meantime, the addict is experiencing incredible and severe withdrawal symptoms, and that are very, very just nearly impossible to deal with. Very violent symptoms like vomiting, muscle ache, anxiety, sleeplessness, fatigue, diarrhea. And so again, withdrawal is something that you just can't explain. Like if there is a hell and it does exist, withdrawal will be forever. Like that would probably be hell if hell does exist. And so because the withdrawal symptoms are so severe, the addict cannot wait for the body to re-regulate itself, because it's just intolerable. They just can't take it. Some people have been able to do it. They can go through cold turkey and they can't fight it out, but the majority of people, it's just too intense. And that's why people will often do things that under normal circumstances they would never ever do, because the desire for that drug and the withdrawal symptoms and the fact that your body is now getting used to a higher level of that drug, because again, the addict is not likely going to wait for the body to re-regulate itself. So they're going to inject more drugs, or however they administer their drugs, they're going to take more of it. And so now the body is starting to get used to these elevated levels of these neurotransmitters, and it will adapt to that. And when you're going through withdrawal, like your body is literally screaming for that drug. Your skin is literally crawling, and again, it is incredibly uncomfortable feeling. And that's why people will do the craziest things. They'll sell their bodies, they'll rob somebody. The consequences don't matter. The only thing that matters is getting rid of that withdrawal symptoms. And it might not even be about getting high, because people will say, oh, I can't believe that you'd be willing to do this just for a high. Well, not necessarily, because once your body adapts, you may not feel that same euphoric experience that you felt before. But again, the withdrawal symptoms are so incredibly horrible that you can't take it. Like, you can't take it. And you become so desperate that you'll be willing to do whatever it is you need to do to get that drug, to regulate your body again, just to feel normal. So that's the psyche of what's going on in an addict's mind when their desire for that drug is so intense. And so for those of you, again, that have loved ones or dealing with someone right now that is suffering from a drug addiction, that's why they're doing a lot of the crazy things that they do. That's why they're having these extreme mood swings, because the body chemistry, the neurotransmitter receptor interaction is completely out of whack, and the body is trying to regulate itself, and it's not able to regulate itself. And so that's what's happening. And so it certainly does not justify any outrageous behavior. However, it helps you to understand that's why they're doing this. It's not because they hate you. It's not even because they hate life or whatever. It's just because the fear of withdrawal and the pain and discomfort associated with withdrawal is so extreme. You'll do anything to get rid of it and to feel normal again. So another reason why people also develop a tolerance, there's actually so many actions in the body that are happening that contribute to the body's ability to develop a tolerance. And one of those is a structure inside the body called a smooth endoplasmic reticulum. So this right here is your cell. And I hope there's a good view for you guys in the camera, because I can't really see. And inside the cell are what's called organelles. And every organelle has a different function. Well, one of the organelles is called the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. And the smooth endoplasmic reticulum is responsible for detoxifying the body. And again, keeping everything in homeostasis. And so when you take a drug, the smooth endoplasmic reticulum will work to detoxify the body and kind of disintegrate the drug to the best of its ability. And the more drugs you put in, the more the smooth endoplasmic reticulum will come into play to kind of get rid of that drug and get it out of the system as soon as possible. And so the body, although the body will scream for the drug when you take it, when you're addicted, it will also fight against the drug, so the drug doesn't have the negative impact that it has on the body. So again, it's an incredibly complex process, and this is probably, in order for you guys to really understand how intricate it is, this is really as general as I could possibly get. And one of these days, if you guys ever want me to do a really in-depth video about the nervous system and how it functions, I'd be happy to do a series like that. I love to lecture. I love to discuss anything that has to do with anatomy and physiology. And as I was pre-med for several years, and even though I didn't go on to graduate school or anything and just incurred a lot of debt, it certainly did benefit me in some ways, because I did learn a lot. And so it really helped me actually in my career to understand the body and my clients and addiction, depression, anxiety, and helping people to deal with that. So, okay, so this is the end of part 1. Oh, I'm so sorry. I almost forgot to talk about alcohol. So let's talk about alcohol. Okay. So, alcohol affects our GABA neurotransmitters. Okay. And if you guys remember when I discussed the functioning of neurotransmitters, the GABA neurotransmitter is what's responsible for producing an IPSP, an inhibitory postsynaptic potential, which decreases the chance of an active potential, which decreases your heart rate, decreases your breathing, and it is responsible for making you feel calm, making you feel relaxed. And it works with glutamate. They both work together to keep everything balanced and everything, the way it should be. When you drink alcohol, it stimulates the GABA receptors and floods your body with GABA receptors. And as well as dopamine, it also initiates the action of dopamine. So again, dopamine is just kind of, it's always there. It's always there. No matter what's going on, you can depend on dopamine to be there. So basically it stimulates the neurotransmitter GABA. And that's why when you drink alcohol, you feel, it calms you, makes you feel relaxed, you feel happy, you feel like you can let loose. And as well as, depending on how much you drink, causing you to pass out eventually. And again, because just like GABA, a lot of tranquilizers and benzos work like a GABA receptor, alcohol is the same way. It mimics what a GABA receptor does. So over time, if you're somebody who is an alcoholic and you drink on a regular basis, your body is used to those increased levels of GABA now. And so if you don't have a drink, if you go through a time period where you don't consume any alcohol, the GABA receptors are now drastically depleted. And again, it's the same action. If there's too much of that neurotransmitter, the receptors will pull back, and now the body is used to having that high level of that neurotransmitter. And then when you don't have the drug that stimulates the increase of that production of that neurotransmitter, you go through a withdrawal. So with alcohol specifically, again, it works even a little bit different, because when GABA is depleted, when your GABA levels are low, it cannot regulate the actions of glutamate, which again is the excitatory postsynaptic potential neurotransmitter, and it will make you overactive. And that's why when people are going through withdrawal of alcohol, they shake. And that has to do with the increased levels of or actually not necessarily the increased levels of glutamate, but the decreased levels of GABA that are not there to regulate the glutamate. And the only thing that makes it go away is to drink more alcohol, therefore increasing their GABA levels. And so, again, it's no secret that this is an incredibly vicious cycle. And if you don't do something about it, will ruin your life and could even kill you. And so, but it's really good to understand the mechanisms of what happens in your body when you inject it with any type of drugs, alcohol, as well as overeating, food addiction, as well as gambling, as well as shopping, because again, that reward center is stimulated. And a lot of this also has to do with our subconscious mind, because gambling, like back, thousands of years ago, when we were in our primal days, there was no gambling, there was no shopping. And so we got a sense of reward when we caught an animal and were able to cook it and eat it. We got a sense of reward and motivation to continue that so that we can survive. Well, our idea of survival has changed since then. Now we equate survival, at least again in this country and in many other countries, we equate survival with having material things. So that's why, like, when you get a new phone or a new computer, you kind of get that rush, like, yay, I got a new phone, a new computer, this is so awesome, and you want to play with it and see what it does. Because now in our mind, we believe that we need these devices in order for us to survive. So when we buy things, or whether it's a purse, I know for me personally, I definitely have a problem with buying purses. So although I might, go out and get a new purse, it will release that neurotransmitter of dopamine, that reward center, making me feel happy because I got something that I subconsciously feel like I need, what I really don't need for survival. And so again, a lot of the way our neurotransmitters work also kind of has to do with our culture and how we subconsciously equate what we need for survival, as well as gambling. Gambling also has to do with adrenaline and just the risk of maybe losing money, and also the reward of getting a lot of money. So that's another mechanism, that works, a little bit differently. But again, the common theme in all of these addictions is dopamine, the reward center, and escape. escaping from normal life and not having the ability to deal with life problems in a healthy and productive way. And so that's why we're going to talk about exercise and how exercise can be a very powerful ally in helping you to overcome these addictions. And if you stay consistent and you stay committed to an active lifestyle, and when I say lifestyle, I mean your whole lifestyle revolves around exercising, being active, taking care of yourself, with what you eat, with the people you associate with, what have you. So health and wellness is not just about exercise. And that's why my motto for my business is more than a workout, a better quality of life, because it really is a better quality of life. When it comes to being healthy, it really goes so much more into fitness and nutrition. So, but again, so part 2 is going to be specifically about exercise and all the incredible benefits that it has and how it can help you to overcome the cravings and overcome your desire to reintroduce that drug into your life or to overcome an addiction that you might be dealing with right now. So, all right, guys, as always, thank you so much for your time and attention. I know this one was definitely a lot more in depth than the videos I normally do, and I don't always know if I'm explaining it very clearly, because I do have some learning disabilities when it comes to organizing things in my brain. Like, I know it's there, but my ability to organize it doesn't always come out. Like, what's in my head doesn't necessarily come out the same way when I actually speak it. So I hope this made sense to you, and I hope that it really helped you to understand in depth what's going on in your body and how amazing your body is, and to respect it and to appreciate it. So, all right, guys, remember to always take care of yourself, protect yourself physically and emotionally, and don't forget your health is your most valuable asset. Bye-bye.